is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister calls for a day of national mourning after dozens are killed in a crush at a religious festival.
The Eurozone hits a double-dip recession, pulled under by its largest economy, Germany.
European regulators accuse Apple of violating antitrust laws, saying it's deliberately restricting rival music services.
We'll be at a government-sanctioned play in Belgium as dozens of other arts venues reopen illegally. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for a day of national mourning after dozens of people, including children, were crushed to death at a crowded religious festival.
At least 45 people have died and many more were injured. It was during the annual Lag BaOmer commemoration at Mount Meron in the country's northeast. Tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews attended the all-night event. Witnesses say many people suffocated or were trampled in a narrow passageway while trying to exit.
Well, Stephanie Freed joins us now from Mount Meron. Stephanie, this is a terrible disaster. What happened?
Well, recapping really what you said, people were gathered here, estimated tens of thousands of people. They were attending a pilgrimage. And when they were trying to exit, a few people slipped and fell in a narrow corridor, and then it created really a macabre domino effect where other people fell on top of them. Then there was a push, and then people were crushed. Talking to people who later in the day, when we arrived here, they said people were screaming, and then they stopped screaming because they couldn't scream anymore. They ran out of breath. We heard about children being trampled, children being run over by strollers. Scenes that, as you can imagine, that's basically, in a nutshell, many, too many people in a very narrow space, a panic and a stampede. Juliet.
Stephanie, to get an idea why there were so many people there, what is Lag BaOmer?
Lag BaOmer, it's a Jewish holiday. It celebrates a few things. One is the end of an official Jewish mourning period. So it's a holiday where people are encouraged to be outdoors, to create or to make bonfires, to picnic, to be in nature. As well, it celebrates at the site where the stampede was the death in the 2nd century of the rabbi who is believed to be responsible or was responsible for the start of the study of the mystical side of Judaism, the mysticism. So he's revered. That's why the pilgrims come up this hill. They're marking his death annually and paying homage to him.
Now, many coronavirus restrictions have been lifted in Israel, but how prepared were the authorities for big crowds like this?
Well, that's the question that everyone's asking today. The health ministry officials had said regarding coronavirus, they didn't. I mean, Israel's way ahead on vaccinations. They've removed mask requirements. But health officials were saying they only wanted a few thousand people here. That didn't happen. In terms of the police and the people who were in the surrounding area, thousands of police. They've been warning, and I say they, meaning officials, meaning the state comptroller, have been warning for as long as a decade that what happened overnight Thursday, they were warning against it because of the numbers, because of the pushing, because of the crowding. So coronas or not, this is something, coronavirus or not, this is something that officials have been warning about, including the country's watchdog, the state comptroller, for years and years. Juliet.
Stephanie Freed in Israel, thank you very much for the update.
In other news, the Eurozone slid into a double-dip recession at the start of the year, with the bloc struggling to recover from the pandemic after a slow vaccine rollout. Its largest economy, Germany, shrank 1.7% as lockdown measures to contain rising COVID cases returned. That's a reversal from 0.5% growth in the previous quarter. Italy, dragged down by lower activity in the services sector, saw a slightly smaller decline than forecast. It contracted 0.4% after a slump in the fourth quarter. And Spain's gross domestic product shrank 0.5% as household consumption and manufacturing fell. France bucked the trend, though, beating expectations and growing 0.4%, boosted by strong growth in construction. As a whole, Eurozone GDP fell 0.6% in the first quarter, which was better than expected. In the wider European Union, the economy shrank 0.4%. Well, for more, Ryan Thompson joins us from Frankfurt. So, Ryan, not a great start to the year, particularly for Germany.
No, absolutely not. If you remember, this country has been in some form of shutdown since November, and that got even worse come December when it entered this hard shutdown. They thought it would end in February and they could start to reinvent the services industry, but that time never came, and now we find ourselves at nearly May and the country's economy is largely at a halt. Manufacturing has continued. It's actually seen a bit of a boom, selling goods to China and managing to output a number of cars and other industrial activity. But it hasn't been enough to offset a lot of these losses that we are seeing in Europe's largest economy in sectors like services, tourism, consumer spending. These are key assets for Germany to be able to take in some of its GDP numbers here. It will be interesting to see how they can do it down the line.
And Ryan, why do we think France performed better than the rest of Europe's major economies?
Yeah, well, France has really bucked the trend here with this slight increase in its GDP. By my assessment, it's because the industries, especially the service one, have been able to adapt to sort of continue within the realms of the coronavirus regulations. For starters, France has not been in a hard shutdown. It has just been living with a curfew, which meant for a long time people had to be at home by 6 p.m. It's only recently gone back into these type of lockdown, which again is much lighter than what it has seen previously. But certain industries, whether it be hotels, have adapted to co-living spaces, restaurants have reinvented themselves, and during most of this time, commerce has been allowed to proceed. According to the key economic indicators, though, it does suggest that while services have been able to slide by, construction has been the industry giving the economy its biggest boost in France.
And Italy's government forecasting a rebound of 4.5% this year. Is the second quarter looking a little bit better for the Eurozone?
Yeah, consumers are expected to spend like there's no tomorrow. They're calling it pent-up spending because a lot of people are sitting at home collecting pretty much full paychecks and not really having a place to spend it on holiday or luxury goods or anything fun for that matter. According to the bank Allianz, their economists are predicting about $200 billion in spending once the Eurozone economy fully reopens in these countries. That's equal to over 1% of the entire Eurozone GDP. So it could provide a much needed boost to these struggling economies. And you mentioned Italy there. Them, like Spain and like Croatia and Greece, they are betting big on one key asset of their economies, which is tourism. And they are betting big that tourists will return. They are eager, they have the money, and that will provide a big leg up to these economies that need a handout right now.
They sure will. Thanks so much for that. Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt.
Well, meanwhile, it's deadline day for EU member states to submit their national recovery plans to the European Commission for a share in the bloc's near $1 trillion pandemic recovery fund. Danai Kerikopoulou, who is the chief economist and director of research at OMFIF, which is an independent economics and finance think tank, joins us now. Danai, what needs to happen here to dish the payments out to where they're needed most?
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. So we are now in the phase where the member states are submitting their proposals, but after that there will be a process through which the Commission needs to look at the proposals, approve them, see that they meet the criteria, particularly alignment with the strategies in terms of digital and green initiatives that the Commission has put, there will be some back and forth, there will be some complex process, and then ultimately the reimbursement of the funds will happen after that. There may be areas where the Commission and the Member States don't see completely eye to eye, so we shouldn't treat it as a done deal, but it's the start of that process after today's deadline.
You say there are some areas where they might not see eye to eye, so what could potentially go wrong?
So we've already seen there are some questions around, for example, repayment, which some member states have already raised, about to what extent will the EU be able to centralize some of the conditions around repayment. At the moment, the taxation happens mostly on a national level, but there may be some areas where the EU can have centralized powers, for example, related to climate and digital again, so a tax on digital activities, or in the case of climate, a carbon border tax, or the emissions trading scheme. So that may be one area where we may see a little bit of an issue going forward. Another may be, again, the extent to which the reforms that the countries end up implementing match their plans. And again, how is that monitored is something that the Commission may want to be involved in.
Now, what if it all falls apart, though, if plans aren't approved, or if some of the more frugal countries, like the Netherlands, for example, put on the emergency brakes? I'm wondering what that could mean for the EU's reputation and for its future.
Yeah, I don't think we will get to that level. We are used to the EU operating in that mode, if you like, where there is some opposition to start with, especially from some of the countries such as the ones you mentioned. But ultimately, it is an iterative process. And we saw also with the German Constitutional Court that initially did have a case in the Recovery Fund, but ultimately it cleared the way. So I think it is the way that Europe is doing things. It is a heterogeneous, complex system, very much unlike other jurisdictions like China or perhaps even the US, where decisions can be taken in a more straightforward way. You have different member states with different interests, but I don't see it likely that it would all fall apart. It is a big step for Europe. It has come a long way to be able to do this, and I think ultimately that common vision will prevail.
It's a big step for Europe, and there's a big amount of money that we're talking about. You also mentioned the question mark over repayment. So in terms of paying it all back, these grants, these loans, is that being glossed over?
Well, I think when we think about repayment and thinking about the debt that Europe is taking on, we have to think about the very low borrowing costs that are the case at the moment. And I think also it's not just about the debt that is being accumulated, but thinking about the sustainability of that debt is also about how productive the investments will be. Because if you're moving from a crisis situation like now into one where you've executed productive investments that enhance growth, then you are in a much better position to repay them compared to the situation where you don't do anything. So I think it's important to add that nuance to it in terms of thinking about the repayment. Now, in terms of the more technical ways to repay it, yes, there may have to be some budget cuts in the future. There may have to be some tax increases, but these will be financed hopefully by enhanced growth and productivity because of these investments that are focused on improving the economic returns in each country.
Danai Kyriakopoulou, thank you very much.
UK government debt is now estimated to be more than $3 trillion. The country's Office for National Statistics says it amounts to around 104% of GDP. Boris Johnson's government has borrowed hundreds of billions of dollars during the pandemic.
The UK is about to experience its biggest economic boom since after World War II, so says the chief executive of Barclays Bank, Jeff Staley. His prediction came after Barclays saw a surge in profits for the first quarter, with pre-tax gains of $3.3 billion, more than double the same period a year earlier.
And France's BNP Paribas also beat analyst forecasts for their first quarter results. Net profits rose 38% to more than $2 billion, driven by a boom in equity trading and lower than expected charges for bad loans. The profits helped offset a slump in demand for fixed income products.
Coming up, Amazon reports blowout profits during the pandemic due to unprecedented demand in online sales.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
And welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, and of course CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Chinese regulators have ordered 13 online platforms to fix problems in their financial divisions. They include tech giant Tencent and TikTok's parent company ByteDance. Authorities say the aim is to prevent anti-competitive practices and reduce financial risks.
Chinese electric car startup NIO says a global chip shortage will affect its deliveries in the second quarter. The company's CEO says production had to halt for 5 days at the end of March. It forecasts deliveries of about 22,000 vehicles from April to June.
China's factory activity expanded at a slower than expected pace in April, although strong demand for manufacturing helped sustain growth. The Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 51.1 in April, down from 51.9 in March. But it remained above the 50-point mark that separates growth from contraction.
And a new law against wasting food has taken effect in China. Restaurants can now be fined up to $1,500 for persuading customers to order too much. And customers can also be charged extra for leaving excessive food on their plates. The law also bans bloggers from live streaming binge eating.
Amazon has reported profits of $8.1 billion for the first 3 months of this year. That's more than 3 times higher than the same period last year. It's been one of the biggest winners of the pandemic as people increasingly rely on home shopping. Most of America's other big tech firms also saw strong figures this week. Well, let's talk to John Terrett, who's in New York. I mean, John, my other markets insiders have worked it out. Amazon made $13,000 a second in the first quarter. I mean, that's even more than your CGTN fee, isn't it?
No, it's more than that, I'll let you know. Yes, I'm afraid so. Yes, I demand the big bucks here. Listen, this is an extraordinary story, and I like talking about Amazon very much. It's a very, very interesting company. First of all, the share price. Share price last night when the earnings came out, up 5%. Today, up 1.2% at an all-time high of $3,513 per share. $3,500 per share. Now, the reason is that the profit tripled and the revenue's been absolutely soaring. They made more in the pandemic than they made in the previous 3 years, which is extraordinary. Their services, their cloud division, their e-commerce division, all up 45%. With these numbers, you can't imagine them. It's absolutely extraordinary. Now, the story behind Amazon is that it's going to get a new CEO in a couple of months' time. Andy Jassy will take over from July. He's currently the head of AWS, which is the cloud division. He's going to replace Jeff Bezos, who, of course, founded the company. Liz, our producer, reminded me today that AWS, a very important division at Amazon that does cloud business, actually hosts Netflix. So everything that Netflix does is entirely hosted by Amazon's AWS cloud division. Now, of Jeff Bezos, he founded the company 27 years ago, 1994. And when he did that, nobody knew what he was on about. I mean, seriously, nobody knew what this could become, what it has become. That's because, of course, back then we were all on dial-up, and now we're on 5G. That's the main reason for that. He spent many years fending off the banks because he said to them, you're not going to get your money back for 20 years. And they sort of said, oh, OK, fair enough. Well, then, of course, they wanted the money back, and he did a Herculean job of keeping the company going until it reached this level of profitability. And the other side of the story, and this is why Jeff Bezos was so angry, he was incandescent, that they wanted to start a trade union in Bessemer in Alabama. But the other side of the story is that Amazon can be a bit of a sweatshop. Now, Amazon, of course, rejects that. They say, look, in Alabama, we pay above the minimum wage. We've got health care. We've got other benefits. It's all there for you. We're the biggest employer in the area. But the staff wanted to go down the road of a union. Amazon campaigned very heavily against it. In the end, the staff rejected the idea. And, you know, this now is the latest line from Amazon with these extraordinary figures in their latest set of earnings. Julia?
Extraordinary figures, an extraordinary company. But other than Amazon, I mean, it really does seem that, like, traders are taking a bit of a breather, certainly after Thursday's blockbuster sessions.
Yes.
That said, things are pretty tepid for Twitter, aren't they?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. All the earnings this week have been very, very strong for pretty much all the US companies. There's been 166 of them from the S&P 500 giving us their earnings. And the tech companies have done particularly well. But there's two schools of thought here. What about, you know, can it continue? Or, you know, are we going to grow from here? And it depends who you talk to on Wall Street. Twitter is a strange firm. It's not like Facebook and Instagram, which are really cuddly. It can be cold, it can be harsh, it can be cruel sometimes, as you know. It's more like the traditional Reuters and AP news wires that we used to have 30 years ago. I think of it that way anyway. The problem with Twitter is they missed on what they call the daily active users. They were 1 million down, and Wall Street punished them for that. Their guidance going forward was also weak as well. The company is run by Jack Dorsey, who is also the head of Square, the payment company. But because of all this, or certainly because of the guidance miss and the numbers miss, Twitter shares down 9% immediately last night and down a further 13% today. Juliet.
John Terrett in New York. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
One in 1,000 people in England have COVID-19. That's according to new data. The number is 20 times lower than in January and similar to levels seen at the end of last summer. Scotland and Wales are both under the 1,000 mark, while Wales is showing 1 in 1,500. There were 15 COVID-related deaths in the UK on Friday, with just under 2,400 new infections.
The CEO of AstraZeneca has defended his company over supplies of its COVID-19 vaccine. Pascal Soriot says the drug maker did not overpromise on deliveries to the EU. The European Commission has launched legal proceedings against the Anglo-Swedish firm, accusing it of breaking its contract. Luigi Barkle reports.
The Anglo-Swedish company has become a global household name in the past year as one of a few firms to produce an effective vaccine for COVID-19. Sales of the jab alone reached $275 million in the first 3 months of this year. The large chunk of those sales were here in Europe, almost 80% of them snapped up by countries like the UK. Just 8% were in the developing world. Across the wider company, pre-tax profits also rose more than 70%, hitting $1.6 billion. The company's shares rose here in London off the back of the news by almost 5% at one stage. AstraZeneca, though, has faced strong criticism recently and a lawsuit from the European Union over supply issues, which cites delayed and smaller than expected shipments to the bloc. But the company's CEO rejected that claim, saying it's never, quote, overpromised, and that he has no regrets about the firm's behaviour. Elsewhere in the UK, people aged 40 and over here in England have now been invited to start booking in for their vaccines. In Northern Ireland, that's been extended to 30-year-olds, as more non-essential shops have been allowed to reopen there. A further sign that the virus is on the retreat here, as the rapid vaccination rollout continues. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
Despite being affected by those slow deliveries of AstraZeneca shots, Italy has met its target of administering 500,000 jabs in a single day. Officials had hoped to reach the milestone 2 weeks ago, but had to push it back due to supply delays and doubts over AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson shots. Just under 10% of Italy's population has now been vaccinated, in line with the EU average.
From Saturday, anyone in Hungary with an immunisation card will be able to access indoor dining, gyms, theatres, spas and museums. Nearly 4 million Hungarians have now received at least one vaccine dose. Penelope Lish is in Budapest.
Prime Minister Viktor Orban made the announcement via his weekly radio interview that the large-scale reopening will go ahead this weekend. As of Friday, 3.9 million people had received a dose of vaccine. That figure is expected to tick over to 4 million by Saturday. The government's 4 million vaccination target represents around 40% of the population having at least one dose of a vaccine. There was a rush for jabs on Friday, with people queuing outside vaccination centres across Budapest. After it was announced people could book in specifically to have the Pfizer vaccine, the announcement crashed the government's online system as people tried to register. Hungarians were given the ability to choose either Sinopharm or AstraZeneca earlier this week. Previously, there was no choice between vaccines. It's also been announced that from early May, vaccination registration will open to 16 to 18-year-olds. Saturday is when the real changes will become visible, when the vaccinated will be able to access a wide range of businesses. Indoor dining, hotels, leisure facilities like gyms and pools, plus sporting events and zoos will all be open to those who can show a plastic certificate. It follows the opening of outdoor dining a week ago, when 3.5 million vaccinations were recorded. Children will also be able to accompany their vaccinated parents to reopened businesses, and the curfew will be shortened starting an hour later at midnight. Penelope Lish, CGTN, Budapest.
French President Emmanuel Macron has been unveiling his timetable for getting his country out of lockdown. Macron says the country's vaccine rollout has been picking up steam, allowing him to ease restrictions. Lucy Hoff has this from Paris.
It's been a tough few months of restrictions, but now finally some light at the end of the tunnel. French President Emmanuel Macron has laid out his four-step plan on how France will re-emerge from lockdown over the course of the next 2 months, starting from the 3rd of May with the full reopening of schools as planned. Then, if the COVID-19 situation allows, from the 19th of May, the reopening of cinemas and museums, the outdoor terraces of bars and restaurants for groups of up to 6 people. For these business owners in Paris, it's a huge relief.
It's a good way. Paris will change because we are in a new way. People need to go out, people need to go in the restaurants, needs to be served and not at home with children or something like that.
We have no guarantee that what was said yesterday will actually happen. Here in Paris, we still have high levels of infection. We don't know if these measures announced by the president will apply to us.
The domestic travel ban that prevents people from travelling more than 10 kilometres from their home will also be lifted in early May. From the 9th of June, some foreign travel could be allowed, provided you're carrying a health pass, which is either proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test. That could also allow you to attend mass events with large crowds, like a stadium or a festival, but it won't count for everyday things like meeting friends for a drink or going to the cinema. If the overall situation remains stable, France could fully reopen by July, but nightclubs will be forced to remain shut. Lucy Hoff, CGTN, Paris.
More than 100 cultural venues in Brussels and the Belgian region of Wallonia say they'll defy a ban on indoor events and open on Friday. They're frustrated that restrictions have been relaxed in some sectors, while culture remains shuttered after 6 months.
But not all are bending the rules. Some are holding government-sanctioned trial events. And Tony Waterman got a ticket to one of them.
Going to the theatre in 2021 has become a production even before the production.
Hello.
The Royal Flemish Theatre in Brussels has erected a field centre outside. Everyone is required to take a COVID-19 test.
Can you please be gentle?
Before being granted entry. This is just one step in the new safety protocol, a grand experiment to see if the industry can reopen safely. Inside, rows of seating have been removed to provide ample space for distancing. 6 sensors have also been strung around the theater, monitoring air quality in real time, detecting things like CO2, relative humidity, and fine dust particles.
The fluids that people breathe out, the fluids that could contain infectional diseases like COVID. What we do here is actually try to create a climate which is perfectly fine to minimize the risk of spreading diseases through the air.
It's an attempt to strike the right balance between audience size and air quality. Tonight's show is limited to 100 people, and it's art imitating life. The play centers around a son who has lost his mother to COVID-19. In her final days, she's cared for by a palliative care robot.
Wat is dit? Is it een bobbel?
While this production experiment is sanctioned by the Belgian government, others are not. Some 120 venues will fling their doors open starting Friday, defying the current ban on indoor events.
We've been closed for 9 months out of 13. Shops are full of people. Transportations are full of people. We are fighting for rights, right to work as an artist.
Cultural venues are slated to reopen on May 8th, but will be limited to 50 people. Royal Flemish Theatre is hoping to show that larger audiences can be hosted safely. For those in attendance, the play was a welcome distraction.
I didn't mind to they fiddle in my nose and everything to finally see a beautiful performance in flesh and blood.
I forgot my own problems with COVID. It was like we were in a different world.
A different world in which the show must go on. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Still to come, we meet the dentists stepping up to help doctors on the front line of India's coronavirus crisis.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, making last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and me, Juliette Mann. Our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister has called for a national day of mourning after dozens were killed in a crush at a religious festival. The Eurozone has hit a double-dip recession, pulled under by its largest economy, Germany.
EU regulators have accused Apple of violating the bloc's antitrust laws. They claim the company distorts competition for music streaming services on its App Store. Swedish music streaming service Spotify first raised the complaint 2 years ago.
Our concern is that Apple distorts competition in the music streaming market to the benefit of Apple's own music streaming service, Apple Music. Apple Music is not subject to any of these rules, and it's offered at a price at typically €9.99. We are concerned that Apple's rules negatively impacts its rivals by raising its costs, reducing their profit margins, as well as their attractiveness on the Apple platform.
Well, let's get some more on this with Yanis Kourkouris, an antitrust expert and Professor of Law and Economics at Queen Mary University, London. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Tell us more about what this case is about and whether you think Apple's rules distort competition in the market for music streaming.
Thank you very much for having me. So the case is about a complaint from Spotify, and the complaint is based on two elements. One is that Apple imposes on Spotify and other similar app developers of having all customer subscriptions done through the in-app purchase system. So all customers have to subscribe to Spotify through the app in itself. And in addition to that, Apple charges a 30% commission. So that, according to the complainant, leads to a higher price that we all pay to use, for example, Spotify. On top of that, there is a second leg on the case of the European Commission, which is that Apple does not allow Spotify to inform its customers of alternative, cheaper ways of subscribing to the service. So according again to the complaint, so of course this is what we have from the Commission, and which seems to abide by the complaint on this one for the time being. This is what the complainant says, this is what the Commission seems to go forward at this point.
So how likely is a negative finding for Apple, do you think?
Well, the Commission would not have actually reached this point without having a strong case, because as was mentioned, the investigation started a year and a half ago, roughly, and now we have the SO being issued. It's very unlikely that we have seen the Commission issuing the SO to the parties, to Apple in this case, and then pulling back. For the Commission to issue this statement of objections, which will be a very lengthy document, it must believe it has a pretty strong case. So on the probability of Commission totally reverting its thinking, I would say it's pretty unlikely.
And what does it all mean for consumers, people like you and me who want to use these services?
Now, if the Commission is right, because again, we only have the Commission side on this one for the time being, if the Commission is right and the consumers would probably be paying higher prices because of Apple's conduct, what Apple will need to do is stop that conduct, which means we will be able to access alternative methods of actually subscribing to Spotify and other apps, and assuming this will be cheaper, we will actually pay less. So at the end of the day, if the Commission is right, we should be in a position to pay cheaper prices for the apps we use, for the music we stream on Spotify and other similar competitors.
How's this going to impact Apple's wider business model, and what ramifications will it have for the tech sector in general?
Well, this is only one complaint, and this is only by one competitor in this particular case. When the case started, there were two complaints against Apple, raising very similar issues. So now we have the case on one of them. It's likely that the Commission is also investigating the other complaint, and will also probably find in a similar way in relation to the other complaint. The other complaint has to do with the e-books market. So what are the broader implications? As a result of this decision, assuming again the Commission proceeds with the decision, as a result of this decision, Apple will have to change the way it does business on the App Store. So it will not be in a position anymore to impose on app developers that all subscriptions have to be done through the app. It will have to give the app developers the option to offer subscription methods outside the app system. Now, if this way of operating is profitable for Apple, then of course that is a change to the business model, because Apple's business model in this particular sense will have to change. Apple has to rectify the problem the Commission finds. And this can have an impact on the profitability, in addition to the potential fine, which is always an outcome in this kind of decisions.
Well, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Yanis Kokoris from Queen Mary University, London. Thank you.
Several Indian states have run out of COVID-19 vaccines a day before a major drive was due to begin to get the population inoculated. It comes as the crisis-hit country reported another daily world record, more than 386,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. Hospitals and morgues are overwhelmed, but medicine and oxygen supplies are arriving from other nations. The country's health system is on the brink of collapse as it struggles to cope with the crisis. In Mumbai, a group of young dentists have diverted their skills to support doctors on the front line. Pracheta Sharma reports.
In this COVID care centre, one of the largest in Mumbai, these doctors gather in a huddle every hour to assess bed availability. All 2,000 beds in the facility are now occupied. Like in a game of chess, they constantly have to move patients who are out of danger from ICU beds and take in those who need critical care. Dr. Sapna Rao and her team have been kept on their toes as a second wave of infections peaks in the city. All dentists by profession, they came together when there was a severe shortage of doctors in the field to treat COVID patients. So far, they have successfully treated and cured over 14,000 patients.
Fighting through this pandemic has been a challenge in which we have learned so much, from 32 teeth, what we used to see, and from a gum surgery, what we call in a normal term, to handling something of COVID, has been a total challenging process.
Dr. Neelam Andrade, who leads the dentists, says this has been an especially difficult time for them. She says it's hard to stay hopeful with death looming around, but they've chosen to stay on and do their duty as medical practitioners.
Somebody has to be there to save lives. And if we are there and we are here since 1 year, we are the most experienced. If at this point of time we run away from the field and a new person comes, they may not be able to handle it that well. So when we get messages from the relatives, they phone us, they send us messages of thank you for saving their relatives, and their relatives are back home. It gives us more encouragement that yes, let us save as many as we can.
The second wave hit Mumbai city in the first week of April. In less than 15 days, there were nearly 50,000 active COVID cases in the city. The entire healthcare system was overwhelmed with the new surge, and the emotional toll was severe for those serving on the front line of this pandemic.
I have had patient relatives coming and crying outside our gate and saying, milne do, last time milne do, and I don't know how to tell them that, see, you are at a risk by going in, I can't love you. That is a time when you break down, within, but you can't show it.
The second wave of COVID-19 has been brutal for India. Mumbai city has been under a strict lockdown for over 3 weeks now, and frontline workers like Dr. Neelam and her team are working non-stop to slow down the spread of the virus.
Determined to uphold their oath to preserve the health and welfare of their fellow Indians, these COVID warriors continue to bravely face the ongoing pandemic storm, armed with hope and a strong sense of duty. Pracheta Sharma, CGTN, Mumbai.
Germany is said to become the first country to return Benin bronzes to Nigeria. The metal sculptures were looted from the Kingdom of Benin by British soldiers in 1897 and later auctioned off. Germany's culture minister says it's facing up to its moral and historical responsibility and will send them back from 2022.
The bodies of 2 Spanish journalists and 1 Irish charity worker have arrived in Spain after they were killed near a nature reserve in Burkina Faso. The 3 men were part of an anti-poaching mission that was attacked by gunmen. French and UN forces are trying to suppress terrorist groups in the region.
Belgian authorities have destroyed more than 22,000 guns by melting them into 60 tons of recycled steel. Half the guns were outdated police weapons. The rest had been handed in by the public.
Hundreds of South Korean fishermen have been protesting against Japan's decision to release contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear plant. Japan also plans to release the water into the sea in the next 2 years after further treatment. Various countries, including China, have condemned the move, saying it poses a threat to public health.
Lava is flowing from Guatemala's Pacaya volcano once again after it erupted in February. The volcano is around 25 kilometers south of the capital, Guatemala City. There are fears that the lava flows could spread to nearby communities.
Still to come here on CGTN, no hashtags, no likes. We'll find out why leading sports personalities are boycotting social media.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome back to the United States now, where President Joe Biden has wasted little time during his first 100 days in office in signing orders on racial equality and civil rights.
And although they've been largely welcomed by activists, some warn much more needs to be done, and fast. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports from Minneapolis.
George Floyd's death in Minneapolis under the knee of Derek Chauvin almost a year ago sparked protests across the United States, with widespread calls to end police brutality and systemic racism. According to President Joe Biden, Floyd's death changed minds and mindsets. And in contrast to his predecessor, Biden vowed to make racial equity central to his agenda.
He started off right. He picked a black vice president. He meant business. He made his cabinet is very diversified. Women, multicultural. So he started off right. And that tells me this man is on a mission.
George Floyd's death here had global ramifications, but it also had the effect of mobilizing black voter registration that would go on and have a key impact in November's presidential elections. Less than a week into the job, Biden signed 4 executive actions aimed at increasing racial equity. He's calling on the Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which would, among other things, ban chokeholds and end qualified immunity, which protects law enforcement officers from most civil lawsuits. A truckload of fresh fish is delivered to a supermarket in Chicago's Chinatown. Although it looks like business as normal, here, along with many other US cities, hate crimes against Asian Americans have increased. The advocacy group Stop AAPI Hate says it received more than 2,800 reports of hate incidents directed at Asian Americans in the US last year.
What has happened in the past few years with the previous administration is that there's a lot of public rhetoric about, the virus being from China, calling out the Wuhan virus, Kung flu, and so on and so forth, and that exacerbates.
Biden's early executive orders included condemnation of anti-Asian bias and violence, and he added measures to strengthen the administration's response to such racism in March.
Biden's also applauded passage of an anti-Asian hate crimes bill by the US Senate. He's expected to sign it into law once it gets through the House of Representatives next month.
Say his name! Say his name!
Few other issues better illustrate the gap between the Biden and Trump administrations than their respective approaches to racial issues. But experts warn the clock is ticking if Biden is to achieve significant change. Dan Williams, CGTN, Minneapolis.
A 4-day boycott of social media is underway to put pressure on companies like Facebook and Twitter to do more to stamp out racism and online abuse.
Yes, football's Premier League has been joined by a host of other leading sports organisations calling for better measures to tackle hate and discrimination. Here's what some of the club managers have been saying.
I am pleased that the Premier League is doing a strong decision about this. Sending letter to the social media company, because I think enough is enough.
It has to be stopped. This way of discrimination on social media, we can't do a lot, can we? So we have to work with the platforms, and they've got to be more stronger to make sure that we stop this.
Ban the whole lot as far as I'm concerned. No social media for me would be the way forward, and I'm right behind them. But I do think, Keith, in all seriousness, that the platforms which they're given, they should be policed.
People can hide behind whatever account and say what they want to say. That's a problem I think we really, that has to get sorted.
The anti-racism campaign Kick It Out is also backing the campaign. I spoke to Troy Townsend, who's head of player engagement.
I suppose it's a show of force to tell the social media companies that we can't take the level of abuse that is on those platforms without the action, without the accountability, without people being held responsible for the words, the messages that they press and send to our sports stars and people that work in and around the game. So it's the first time that I've ever experienced this kind of level of kind of collective force from football and beyond. And I think it's a powerful, powerful statement. And it's a start of maybe, hopefully, something quite new where we do all, sound the same and talk the same on the topic of racism and discrimination.
You've said it yourself, British sport has never mobilised before behind its athletes to fight racism in this way, which makes it significant. I mean, what does the campaign want these social media companies to actually do?
It wants them to protect its users. It's not even difficult what we're trying to achieve. We want our users to be protected. Our users are the sports stars that we've spoken about, and those that work in the game and who obviously are constantly abused as well. This is not just from a playing perspective, but we want them to protect the users, protect them from the hate, from the crime that continues to happen on those social media platforms.
This boycott is symbolic, but in terms of creating change, what progress has been made so far, and what would you like to see happen next?
Juliet, it's snail's pace, if you really want me to be honest. We're in 2021 and we're still talking about challenging racism. We're still talking about protecting the entertainers on the field of play from the kind of vile hatred that exists on these platforms. We're not appreciating their traumatic experiences because football, apparently, they're not human beings, and they get paid a hell of a lot of money and they should just be able to get on with it. So I think I mentioned it. It's making sure that the players can play free from fear, free from fear of playing a game of football, either making a mistake or a perceived mistake or scoring a goal against another team, and then knowing that your social media platform is going to be full of emojis with language that should not be deemed acceptable in this day and age. So getting the social media platforms to understand that language, understand the impact of what it is doing to those individuals, and making sure that it can be eliminated. But the other element of it is holding our own government to account, holding our government to say that you need to put certain things in place. They've been talking about an online harms bill now for the past 2 years. Well, we're asking for a timeline around that. We're asking for when it will come to fruition, if it will come to fruition. Is it the thing that will hold those social media companies to account? You know, we just had the European Super League fallout, which I'm quite sure everyone will know because it was a global thing. But we had, you know, our government talking about changing of legislation, you know. We had the UEFA talking about throwing teams out of competition and making players not being able to represent their countries if they join the Super League. We've never seen that energy when it comes to racism and challenging it and tackling it. And all we ask for equality. We ask to be compared with. We ask for the noise around racism, not just to be noise, but actually to turn into actions. And unfortunately, we've been talking in this space for far too long. So I don't think the players want to hear the conversations anymore. They just want to see what direct actions will be taken, not only on social media platforms, but if ever they're going to have to experience racism again.
Tokyo Olympic organisers say severe penalties may have to be considered to ensure compliance with COVID-19 measures. The proposed rules include daily testing of athletes and restrictions on the use of public transport. So far, Japan has vaccinated just 1.8% of its population. Only Japanese spectators are being allowed to attend the Games.
On the agenda this weekend, Stephen Cole will be looking at the future for the travel and tourism industry as it faces another bleak European summer. He'll be speaking to the Chief Executive of the European Travel Commission, who says there's some hope that this year will be better, with more short and long-haul travellers looking for a much-needed holiday.
Pretty convinced that, long-haul markets, you mentioned two of them, US and China, will be coming back to Europe by mid or late summer. What we foresee here is actually an extended summer season, so we see a summer that's going to last practically until end of October or November. With a lot of these markets coming later in the year, the European Union has announced the digital green certificate. Some people call it a vaccination passport, but it's not a passport. And it is not
what is
a certificate that... Well, it is a proof of vaccination, a proof of a negative COVID test, and a proof of immunization, which is none of them is going to be a condition to enter any of the countries of the European Union. Meaning, if you're not vaccinated, you still can come to Europe, but you will be subjected to some other conditions. I think this tool is really, really the hope that we have.
You can see more of that interview on the agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
And for daredevils among us, Portugal has a new attraction to add to the buckets list. At over 500 metres, Europe's longest pedestrian suspension bridge has just opened near Porto. It stands 175 metres above the fast-flowing River Paiva. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted. To get a taste of the experience, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Our main stories again. Israel's Prime Minister calls for a national day of mourning after dozens were killed in a crush at a religious festival.
The Eurozone has hit a double-dip recession, pulled under by its largest economy, Germany.
And European regulators have accused Apple of violating antitrust laws, saying the tech giant deliberately restricts rival music services.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are available to watch on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye-bye.